Hello and a very good morning to you all and a very warm welcome. It's great to see you all here, train strikes notwithstanding. Well done for getting here. I hope you're all feeling Christmassy as we continue with our festive season. My name is Farah and I'm the Marketing and Communications Leader for Buildings London. And so to our speaker this morning. Jeff was born in Johannesburg. His mother's family had settled in South Africa as refugees after the Second World War from Estonia. During apartheid, his parents decided to leave, initially settling in Virginia, where his father lectured in mining engineering, and when Jeff turned 6, his parents moved again, this time to London, where his father taught at Imperial College. Jeff was always interested in the arts and sciences. He knew he wanted to work in the construction industry. However, at the time, he thought he was limited to only 2 choices, either to be a structural engineer or an architect. Largely to defer having to make a choice, he happened to find a degree called architectural engineering. He duly set off to Leeds University, and he also spent a year at Pennsylvania State University. During his degree, he realized that lighting design was indeed an option, and this set his professional trajectory. As with most degrees in engineering, Jeff learnt about Arup, and his older sister was already working with us in the firm as a water engineer. Jeff applied to be a lighting designer at the time when Arup did not even have a lighting team, and subsequently he still was offered a job with Buildings London, and then he helped to set up the lighting team with Florence Lamb, Alphon Davis and Andy Sedgwick. His career has flourished. Jeff says he's done okay, and his portfolio includes working with Herzog and de Meuron, Flagship's Prada store in Tokyo, the Beijing Olympic Stadium, and most recently the Tate Modern extension on the South Bank. Jeff has also worked on the Louvre Museum in northern France, working with Sana Architects. Currently, Jeff is working on Riyadh Metro and Crossrail, providing lighting designs for Bond Street Station, and he's recently completed working with Louis Vuitton. So, without further ado, it's really good to introduce the super lovely Jeff Shaw. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Farah. That was nice to get a super lovely. So. No, and thank you all for being here today. So thanks for joining me. So, how does light affect us as human beings? I think this is an important question for us to all consider. After all, we design buildings for people, and we need to know how to improve their experience of buildings and how to make buildings work for people. How can we use light as a force for good? We know that light can elicit a physiological response in us. For millennia, people have been using heliotherapy and light therapy. There's records of people practicing forms of it in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome. The Inca and the Assyrian and early German settlers worshipped the sun as a life-giving force. And there's records from 1500 BC in India of the use of herbs mixed with direct sunlight to treat non-pigmented skin. So throughout history, and throughout even the Common Era, there's been lots of examples of where light has been used as therapy and light has been used medicinally. Sometimes it works, sometimes it hasn't. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it isn't. But it is still used medicinally for some conditions today. But while proving that that means that light can have a physiological effect on us, I think what I'm interested in is how light affects us on a day-to-day basis in the buildings we occupy. So there is a lot of discussion about the physiological effects light can have on you. Purely for research, I searched the Daily Mail website for the words light and health, and came back with hundreds of articles telling us how LEDs and new lighting technology and blue light was going to make us go blind or kill us or worse. And most of these are based on misunderstood or misrepresented studies, but it shows that there is still a lot we have to learn and a lot we need to discover in terms of how light really affects us. And so there's a lot of discussion at present in the public eye about the physiological effects that light has, and a lot of it centers around the shift in color and intensity of light throughout the day and its effect on our circadian rhythms, on our sleep-wake cycle. This is, for example, one reason why Apple have installed software on their phones that makes it go a warmer hue or slightly orange in the evenings. The idea being that it doesn't keep you awake at night when you're checking your emails in bed. Perhaps you shouldn't be checking emails in bed, but that's a different piece of software maybe. So bright light is also used to treat conditions such as seasonal affective disorder, which I think we probably all suffer from. I obviously traveled here in the dark, and I'll be traveling home in the dark. I'm sure most of you did the same. So this time of year, the lack of light affects us all. So these are sort of treatments or things happening in the real world at the moment. And I do wonder whether all of these are actual physiological responses, or whether sometimes it's just the emotional response of daylight like light or that sort of thing. Because light certainly does have an emotional impact on us. For millennia, humans have had just two sources of light. They've had daylight and they've had flame, firelight. So we've only had electric lighting for the past 150 years or so. So I don't think it's any coincidence that we're still so emotionally drawn to the warmth and comfort of flame, of candlelight, of fire. There's a feeling of romance about it. It's ingrained in our DNA. And I think daylight, too, is deeply woven into us. I use as an example this picture. So what does this tell you? Not much information in this picture. You can see that it's sunny, but what time of year is it? And I think most of us will probably think this is winter. It's a sunny day in winter, and that's because, as we know, the sun is much lower in the sky, at least in northern Europe like we live, in the winter. And so when it's bright in the middle of the day, but you've got long shadows like this, that's winter. And most of us don't think about this. I think we know this instinctively, and I think we can get a lot of information from daylight in that way, and it has an emotional effect on us too, because the feeling that you get on a nice, crisp, sunny winter day is quite a positive one. And I think the shifts that daylight goes throughout the year and throughout the seasons, it tells you a lot about the weather conditions, about the time, the day, the year, the month, but it also gives you an emotional response. It also influences how you feel, if you're happy, sad, warm, depressed, or more joyful, like this last image. So it's clear that daylight has a significant effect on us, a significant emotional effect. So the only real mystery is why we don't use daylight even more in buildings than we already do. I think it's an extremely powerful tool, and I'll give you an example of where daylight can be used in a way that you probably don't think about, in that daylight makes us want to spend money. So there's a number of studies. There's some studies in 1999 and 2003 commissioned by the Pacific Gas and Electric Company and the California Energy Commission. And they concluded that, after studying a lot of retail premises, that all other things being equal, sales were up to 40% higher in retail premises with the presence of daylight. They found that the only indicator better than daylight about high sales in the retail establishments was the length of their opening hours. So daylight's extremely powerful in retail. Daylight also sells real estate. We know this instinctively. We market properties based on the amount of daylight and windows that come in. But there's a 2003 study for the US Department of Energy that cites anecdotal evidence that commercial space with no windows leases for about 20% less than commercial space with windows. That's quite a binary thing, and there's not enough information about the levels of daylight in between, and I think this is somewhere where the industry would benefit from a bit more research. But there's a reason for this. There are a lot of studies that show that daylight in commercial space improve the performance of the people in the space, improve their productivity. It also improves their health and well-being, and good daylighting in a commercial space reduces absenteeism amongst staff. So if you think about it as an investment, I'm sure many of you might be familiar with the 1 to 5 to 200 rule, where if the capital cost of your new commercial building is 1, then you're going to spend 5 times that much over the life of the building in operating and maintaining it, and 200 times as much on the staff. So the biggest resource is really the staff salaries in their building. So yes, if you make a well-daylit space, you might impact the capital cost a little bit. But you're already reducing the maintenance costs by reducing the energy use from lighting. And if you're improving the productivity and the health and well-being of the staff in the building, you're improving that 200 number. And so that makes an incredibly good return on your investment. So it's not all directly about money as well. If we look at education, there's studies. There's a 1999 study commissioned by the Pacific Gas and Energy Company as well, which found strong correlation between schools that recorded higher test scores, up to 10% higher test scores among students, and those schools that had a higher level of daylight in the classrooms. And this just scratches the surface. There's countless other studies I could go through about daylight and the benefits in other types of building and how it actually improves our life. This brings me to trying to replicate daylight. I use the term here, human-centric lighting. It's a new buzzword from our industry. It's been mentioned a lot in the last year or so. I'd suggest I've been designing lighting for humans for the last 20 years, but we're now talking about it now. And what human-centric lighting is about, amongst other things, is trying to replicate the good effects of daylight. It's trying to use shifts in color and intensity of light throughout the day to affect our circadian rhythms, our sleep-wake cycle, and trying to have a similar beneficial effect to daylight. Is this the answer for buildings where we can't get daylight in? I think there is something there. I think there's something worth looking into, but I also think we don't know enough. There's a lot of research in it at the moment going into it. I think a lot more research is needed before we really establish what the best practice and way forward is. We can only carry on looking at it. I think we don't even know for sure exactly what effect we're seeing sometimes. It could be an emotional effect, just you're enjoying daylight more, so that's why you respond positively, rather than a physiological effect. Or it could be a psychological effect. It could be if you install a new fancy circadian lighting scheme in an office space without changing anything else, people still walk in, they perceive the change, and people tend to respond positively to change. So the positive responses you might get from the people in that space could simply be a reaction to that change, rather than directly because of what the lighting is. So there's a lot more research going into this, and I think we need to find out more. Sorry, I can't give you all the answers. So light can subtly affect humans in many ways. I think you have the physiological response, you have the psychological response, the emotional response to light, and of course the visual response. After all, this talk is called, "Without light, there is no beauty." Everything we do in the design of buildings has an influence on the behavior of the people in those buildings. And I'd like to start on influencing behavior. Even the littlest interventions can make a big difference. And I'm going to use this non-lighting example that I stole from a colleague. This is a urinal fly. It's a little sticker. They first appeared in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. It's a little sticker that goes in the urinals in men's toilets. And it turns out that most men can't help themselves but aim at it, probably because we're all still like 5 years old. But it means that the user aims at the specific strategic location. It means that there is less splash that results. It means that the environment around the urinals are cleaner, and therefore the cleaning costs are reduced. The people who make this say it's about 80% cleaner in the area around the urinal if you use them. Conservative costs suggest it saves about 10% in the cleaning costs. But the point is, this is a tiny little, very low-cost intervention, and it's actually influenced behavior to the benefit of the user experience and of the maintenance and operating costs of the building. Another example of where subtle visual cues like this can have a significant effect. This is the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. And the patient bed bays have these striking red lines drawn through the hand wash basins. And that's there to act as a visual reminder to the clinical staff there to wash their hands before and after dealing with patients. So even something simple as a bit of red paint in the wall can change our behavior in a way that could potentially save lives. So if a bit of paint on a wall or a small sticker on a toilet can make such a difference to our behavior, to the benefit, imagine the extra dimension that lighting can add. So for instance, light has always been used as a tool for wayfinding and orientation and navigation in the built environment. We always like to follow the light at the end of the tunnel. And this happens even accidentally. This is a street scene. The light here directs you by the route that you want to take. It takes you perhaps down the safest route, just naturally. The incidental light from the premises here, it contrasts with the street lighting and creates destinations for the shops. The color of that light also, and the intensity of that light, even without signage, can tell you a story as well about whether it's a shop or a supermarket or a restaurant, whether it's open or closed. There's a whole story about navigating the space that is told just by the incidental light in the scene. And so we as lighting designers deliberately use light as a device for wayfinding in buildings to help us navigate, to help us find our way through buildings by the safest route, by the most efficient route, by the route that the operator wants you to take, and to help you navigate your way around some of the more confusing building designs that we do today, where you otherwise might be lost without the subtle indicators that lighting can give you. lighting can also have deeper, more subtle messages about where to go or bringing people in, for example. I take this as an example. So this is a high street store. They use dramatic lighting. They focus on the products. They create a retail experience for you. The lighting is all about the brand and how they want to portray themselves. There's a lot that goes into it. But the same shop with the same products and the same offer in St Pancras Station has an open facade and more general, brighter light. And the difference is, here you're trying to attract a transient person who's walking quickly past, whereas the high street, you're attracting people who've come there to shop. And so thinking about the different people, the different clientele who are coming by, affects how you design spaces and how you design the lighting. So beyond this direct use of light to show you where to go, light can help create a more profound meaning in spaces and shape our experience of them. In architecture, we create the mood, the way the space feels, and we influence how people interact with that space. And ultimately, we influence their behavior. As Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us. So if we fail to light very well pedestrian underpasses and stark, barren tunnels like this, or we light it with ugly, functional, vandal-resistant lighting, doesn't vandal-resistant lighting just say, come and vandalize our space? Perhaps in contrast, we should be thinking more about doing more like this, like in Neville Street in Leeds, where you create a new experience for people. You totally change the feel of the tunnel, make a desirable place to be, create a sense of place, invigorate the local community, make people feel safe and deter vandalism. Lighting can really transform how these spaces feel. And retail knows the value of light, as we've mentioned before. Lighting can really affect the footfall. A survey conducted by electricity company npower in 2014 asked people why they'd left a bar or a restaurant. And of the 1,500 respondents, a third said they had left because of bad lighting, because it was too bright or too dim. So it makes a significant effect. The same study asked people when picking a date what they looked for in the venue, and 66% said that the lighting was more important than the price. 53% the lighting was more important than the music. So we already perceive this as a significant part of our experience. As a quote from one of the writers of the paper says, when you think about what makes a great customer experience, lighting is a key part of that experience. It's all about the ambience, but also it links to the food and the quality. I think we've all experienced where you go to a restaurant or something like that, and the ambience created by good quality lighting in that space probably makes up for mediocre food and service sometimes. So in other retail environments, lighting manufacturer Subtleties conducted a survey where they found that different lighting conditions in retail spaces made different types of personality feel more comfortable and made them dwell longer. And then using this research, they renovated the lighting in a German fashion retail, Jerry Weber. And they claim that the sales increased by 12% as a direct result of the lighting over the next 3 months. Whether this was, I think this 12% was probably a result of the total renovation and not just the lighting, but I think the lighting does have a significant impact. As the people from Subtleties themselves said, the stress level was much lower than before. Customers stayed in some areas longer than before. We measured different kinds of reactions in the same spots before and after the new lighting, so it does have an impact. So we're influencing people's behavior, and we've also seen that lighting can create an emotional response. So how does lighting make you feel? Staying in retail, this is a picture of the fashion label Yohji Yamamoto, their flagship store in Paris. Lighting is deeply intrinsic to the brand and the identity and the feel of the space. And here, it's almost like a museum. It doesn't look like a shop. It looks like the clothes are sort of untouchable and priceless. But that's what they want to portray. That's how they want their retail experience to be for people. Take Louis Vuitton in New Bond Street. It's almost literally a museum. There's works of art adorning the walls alongside the merchandise. It creates an air of exclusivity, luxury, and glamour. That's what they want to achieve. But imagine if you'd intended to walk into an Asda and you'd walked into one of these spaces. You'd probably walk straight out again, or at least you'd have a nagging suspicion it was a very expensive Asda that you were in. So they're deliberately lit in different ways. If you're lighting a low-cost superstore, it needs to optimize the display of the goods, of course. It needs to be a comfortable and inviting environment. But the last thing they want to look like is an exclusive, expensive, opulent space. And other brands have to find a balance between this. Zara, for example, want to portray affordability. They do want to densely pack the stock in the space, but in a way that you don't necessarily realize that they're doing that. They want to create a more exciting retail experience, but still make the clothes feel affordable, but of high quality. The last thing they want to do is feel like a supermarket, but they also don't want to portray an air of exclusivity. Lighting is an important part of the relationship between the customer and the brand. Apple know this very well and use it in their stores as an intrinsic part of their brand. The lighting is there to help create a clean simplicity, cutting-edge technological design as really part of their experience in their stores. Other technological brands probably want to sit alongside this but accentuate their differences. So this is a Sony store where they've used a bit more color to show themselves as being a bit more diverse, playful, approachable perhaps. So color is a key element as well of any brand, and color and light are intrinsically linked. And color can also have a clear influence on our behavior. 2 pills. There was a medical study that found that warm-colored placebo pills were more effective than cool-colored placebo pills. So the psychology of color could fill a whole talk and be another breakfast talk. I'm not sure if Arup would allow that to happen, but I'm going to focus on 2 examples of where colored light are being used at the moment to affect your behavior. So blue light is being used to stop you from committing suicide. A 2012 Japanese study looked at 71 train stations in Japan over 10 years. In 11 of those stations, they'd installed blue lighting, and they found an 84% decrease in the incidence of suicide in those stations. Of course, there could be other factors, but it was a very significant finding. And that's why if you go to Gatwick rail station today, you are bathed in blue light. And this blue light is also being installed in a few other stations around the country. I read recently level crossings in Scotland were getting blue light installed. But the reasons this work aren't necessarily certain. We don't fully know why. It could be that blue light, the color blue, is associated with law enforcement, and therefore you're likely to be a bit more law-abiding in the surroundings. Perhaps more likely, there's the psychological factor that blue has been always consistently found to be a more pleasant, more calming color. Or it could just be an effect of unusualness. It could be that you're not used to a space with blue light, and people tend to tread a bit more carefully in those spaces, and maybe over time the effect will diminish. So it's something that we need to keep watching. So yes, while we're using it as a force for good in this case, we don't necessarily question the fact that we're using light to manipulate your behavior. But light can also be used for evil. So if we go back, daylight makes you want to spend a bit more money. Is that evil? I don't know. But red light can make you want to throw money away. We all know that casinos deliberately avoid windows. They deliberately avoid clocks. They want you to not see the passage of time. But a lot of casinos use red light as well, and this is actually an Arup design, so we're guilty of it as well. I'm not sure we knew it at the time. But various studies have found that red is a stronger, more exciting, and more arousing color than, say, blue. And it is related to faster bets, higher stakes, and more risk-taking. And there was one study in, I think, 2012 that found that high-tempo music and red light sped up people's betting on a roulette game. So it now begs the question, is it right that we're manipulating people in this way? We're deliberately using light to manipulate people's behavior, and it's not always for those people's benefit. I think there's an ethical question behind all of this. And this links back to the discussions maybe about human-centric lighting. It's quite conceivable that once we know enough, we can come up with a scheme that deliberately keeps people more alert throughout the day and makes them work longer hours without necessarily giving regard to their health and well-being when they leave the office. Is that the right thing to do? I think there's a question that we have to answer here, and this is something we have to consider because light is everywhere. As the late Leonard Cohen said, there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. Light reveals our world to us. It allows us to interact with it. And for most of our existence, we've had only sun, the moon, the stars, and fire. Now we have the ability to create light of almost any color and any intensity that we want, and we're only beginning to fully understand the effect it can have on us. It's an incredibly powerful tool, but it's also incredibly subtle. We don't really know it's being used in this way. And I think we need to learn more. We need to understand more about it, and that's why I'm here. And we can use light as a force for good. Light can create value, but it also shapes our world. And without light, there is no beauty. So I'll end with the words of William Shakespeare. When he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. So, thank you very much. I think any questions? I'm supposed to take questions now? Yeah, damn it. Okay. No, any questions? Oh, there's one.
You were talking about the windows in a building and the effect of daylight on people who work or live in that building. But does this necessarily lead to more efficient buildings in terms of actually the ventilation and cooling that will be needed for that? Is there a balance, or is there an objective that is a good target not to over-provide it?
Yeah, I think there is a balance. I mean, obviously I focused on the lighting and the benefits of that, which is one side of the equation, but sun and daylight as a source of heat for buildings as well. So, I mean, we draw a curve, so the more daylight you have, the less energy you use for the electric lighting. But there's a point at which the heat that it brings into the building creates more energy use in terms of the air conditioning system. So it's finding that point, it's finding that optimal point. But that point is further along than you think. If you design responsibly, maximize the use of daylight without necessarily bringing in too much sunlight where most of the heat comes through, then you can make quite very nice, pleasant daylit spaces that people enjoy working in without affecting the heat gains too much. But yes, it is a balance. Oh.
So, on Windows again.
Yes.
There's a confound with, they give you access to light, but they also change the perception of space of the people in the room. In that you have this much broader space that presumably you could see through the window. Do you know how many of the effects of daylight are related to this change in spatial perception, and if there's any means of trying to disentangle them?
Well, I think I don't know for sure. I mean, views are intrinsically linked as well, and I think any good design, but also any good set of targets about daylight also talk about views and not just the daylight and people having views. But you're right, it also changes the whole feel of the space in terms of broadening it. I think that is all part of the emotional response, and I think what's clear is that it improves our experience of the space if it's done well. But yes, I don't know exactly how much is one and how much is the other. But perhaps it's another piece of research. Hopefully there's some people wanting to sign up for research. There's quite a lot to do.
Are Arup undertaking their research at the moment, or are you working on a project-by-project basis?
No, we are undertaking some research at the moment. We're in the middle of writing a paper on human-centric lighting about where we are, what we know now, and how to design with it responsibly at the moment, and looking at where more research is needed. We do have internal research funding that we often use for other pieces, and sometimes partner with universities. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on in the lighting industry as well. I mean, I'm here as Arup today, but I also work a lot with the Society of Light and Lighting, one of the industry bodies under SIBSI, and they conducted research into human-centric lighting last year with Public Health England, and then we're just starting research on flicker, which I didn't mention at all, but light flickering can affect your health and that sort of thing as well. So there's lots of research both within Arup and industry-wide, and we're all trying to get to grips with this more and understand it more. I think there's two elements of it. It's about lighting responsibly, like I'm talking about, but it's also, I want to understand the value we can add more. I want to be able to sit down in front of a commercial developer and say, actually, you want to make these compromises to bring more daylight in your space because you're going to make this much more money out of it as well. So, one more? Oh, as many more as you like.
Sunlight has a broad band of frequencies of light in it, doesn't it? And daylight.
Pretty much all of them, yes.
Light fittings which are fluorescent and which are LEDs just have a few, and the colour that we perceive is sort of a trick that the light fitting is playing around with. Does that matter?
Yes. You're right. The lighting in fluorescent and LEDs is made up of spikes, and a lot of work goes into actually trying to fill that spectrum. on a simple level, it matters in terms of the colors you see. If there's no red in the light that's coming from the ceiling, then the red-colored objects don't appear very well. But it's also, again, it goes back to this the circadian rhythms, and there's a lot of research that suggests that blue light is important to that, whether it has to be specifically blue light or just light that contains the right amount of blue in the spectrum to have an effect. So I think that spectrum of light is important, and I think a lot of the technologies now, especially LED effectively taking over, a lot of work has gone into making those LEDs into a higher quality, more full spectrum light source, because I think it does make a difference and makes a difference to our perception of the space as well as potentially to our health.
So I've been a neuroscientist studying vision for a long time, and I now work in a space where I feel like the lighting design was at the heart of its design principles, trying to get us to actually work a bit better. Honestly feel a little bit manipulated by what you can actually do with lighting design. It's quite powerful to hear about the things that Jeff has managed to achieve through all these projects. It's also been inspiring. My first response was, and I want to go find him now, is we need to do research together. I study these kind of things at the level of brains, and across the street there are people thinking about it at the level of buildings, and it makes quite a bit of sense that we would work together.
Jeff's talk was fascinating, really. I mean, and I think it comes at a really important time, especially as architects, we need to consider how we are actually designing our buildings, especially with sustainability in mind. And to be able to justify good quality lighting and how we articulate the facades of our building to allow natural light in is absolutely critical now. So it's fantastic that we've got fantastic lighting designers and an industry that is supportive of that.